Hi everybody. Brian, thanks for the introduction. And I'm gonna talk. I got some good content for you guys today. I'll tell my story a little bit and things that we've learned about Rising Tide. If at any point in the presentation you guys have questions, please feel free to ask. There will be time at the end also to ask some questions. But if there's questions that you pop up in the middle, I'm happy to try to answer them as well. So if you're like most people who start a business, you're not just doing it because you want to make a great living. You're doing it because you care about someone or something. In my family's case, we started a car wash because we cared about my brother, Andrew. And Andrew has autism. Andrew had a great childhood, filled with a lot of friends, some wonderful teachers, and a family that really loved him. And he became a really capable young man. But when it became time for his high school graduation, we were really wary of what the future would hold for him. And it quickly became clear that without our help, Andrew wouldn't be able to lead the full adult life that we knew he was capable of. So my father and I set out to build a business that could employ Andrew. And my dad, who at this point had been an entrepreneur for 20 years, he didn't shy away from a big and bold challenge. He wanted to build a business that could not only employ Andrew, but would create a community for him and would be purposefully built to empower individuals with autism. So we set the goal of employing people with autism for 80% of our staff. And this would guide everything else that we did. So after months of research, we decided to start a car wash business. And we decided this for a few reasons. First, we felt the car wash really effectively leveraged a lot of the strengths people with autism bring to the workplace. Things like attention to detail, really thriving in routine structure and systems, really some great character traits like loyalty and honesty. We'll talk more about those in a minute. But we also felt that the car wash was a great platform for building a community of like-minded people. So first, we've got about 35 or so employees with autism at each location. That was enough of a employment base where we felt we could really build a strong community within the business. It's also a really tangible service, so we felt it was a great way to communicate to the community how capable people with autism really are. Because you leave the car wash, you got to, hopefully you got a really great clean car when you leave. People with autism provided that service, and you start to fill in the blanks, start to change the way you think about autism. We also felt it's a pretty scalable business because there's over 20,000 conveyor-ized car washes in the US. Felt like in most communities, this business model could work. So with the help of some incredible partners and a lot of hard work, the business has been really successful. Our first car wash that we bought, it was a struggling full-service car wash when we purchased it, and we implemented our staff and our service offering and turned it around from a store that was only washing 35,000 cars a year to one that's now washing over 150,000 cars a year. And that business was successful enough where we were able to build a second car wash that's now even more successful than the first. And we're currently in development on a third location. And the reason for this success is our strategy to employ people with autism for 80% of our workforce. Now, I'm sure you're thinking that, yeah, well, of course he's going to say that this is an autism talk, but I'm not going to speak to you today as an autism expert because I'm not, nor am I an expert in employing neurodiverse people. There have been some brilliant neurodiverse speakers in this series, to do that. I'm here to explain how we've grown a business and created some processes that simply work better by collaborating with our employees with autism. So let's start by talking about some of the advantages that our employees with autism bring to the workforce. It's been really well documented. That many individuals with autism have a stronger attention to detail than the normal person. It also has been well documented that employees with autism have a really strong preference for routine and structure. And this makes them ideally suited for following structured processes and systems. There's a growing body of research that suggests that some individuals with autism are able to identify patterns and abnormalities exceptionally well. So for those individuals, They're extremely well suited for fields like software testing and cybersecurity. Many individuals with autism also display exceptional character traits, things like a great work ethic, a desire to prove themselves, loyalty, high reliability, and an unyielding honesty. And because people with autism inherently think differently than most typical people, they're able to come up with innovative solutions. So let me give you some examples of how these strengths play out in our workplace. So imagine for a second, it's 7:45 on a Saturday morning, and this young man, Dave Pierce, who's pictured in this photo, he reports to work. It's already 90 degrees out. There's a line of cars eagerly waiting to get their vehicles washed. And at this point, Dave has years of experience as a tunnel guide-on associate at Rising Tide, so he knows it's going to be a busy day. The car wash on a Saturday, it typically starts pretty fast, but it doesn't reach peak demand for a couple hours. At this point, a couple hours in, Dave's already covered in sweat from guiding in over hundreds of cars, but it's about to get a lot busier. The line reaches the car wash's property line, and it actually extends beyond what Dave can see from his vantage point at the entrance of the tunnel. I think most hourly employees at this point would fantasize about quitting or dragging their feet for the amount of work that has just been placed in front of them, but not Dave. Dave is reveling in the opportunity to break his own cars per hour record of 112. And amidst the myriad of vehicles approaching him, there's a variety of obstacles that stand in his way of breaking this record. Dave needs to make sure that all the cars have been properly scrubbed of bugs, the bugs that cling to the front bumper and side view mirrors that occur in Florida when you're driving down the highway. He needs to check for trailer hitches, antennas, roof racks, wide mirrors, open truck beds. If any of these features exist, he has to press a series of buttons on his keypad to make sure that certain pieces of equipment are turned off so they don't risk any damage on the vehicle. He also needs to mind his own safety, being careful not to step on the conveyor track or move too abruptly because the floor can get slick from the soap that's around. And finally, he has to clearly, confidently, and warmly guide customers onto the car wash conveyor and instruct them to put their vehicle into neutral. And that sounds a lot easier than it actually is in real life, because many customers are a little bit overwhelmed by the process and have trouble following Dave's instructions. Yet, Dave operates the car wash tunnel with the grace and fluidity that can only be described as a state of flow. After refreshing our car count, our manager, Nick, he runs up to the tunnel entrance, and then for a moment he distracts Dave and startles him, because generally when a manager is running to the front of the car wash, there's an emergency situation. But within seconds, Dave's fear turns to jubilee as Nick exclaims that Dave, he's got a new record. He's done 118 cars in a single hour. And Dave thrusts his arms up in the air as if he just won yet another Special Olympics event, and gives Nick a high five, but then he promptly gets back to work to an attempt to do even better the next hour. So this story, it's a true story. Dave shows incredible focus by staying on task in the midst of really challenging circumstances, a great eye for detail, and his ability to accurately select the proper retracts to guide all cars safely onto the conveyor, and a dogged determination to break yet another record and prove his worth. Dave and his 80-plus colleagues with autism are the reason why Rising Tide is a thriving small business. And here's one of our supervisors. His name's Ezra. He spent 3 years looking for employment after he finished high school to no avail. No one would hire him until we did. And immediately you could tell how eager he was to prove himself. Well, fast forward 3 years, and that enthusiasm, it still remains. It doesn't matter how busy it is or how hot it is, Ezra wants to work. He'd work 7 days a week if we let him. And when he's working really hard. Even after a long day's work, I've never seen him slack off, not even on a single customer's vehicle. He consistently and reliably bends over backwards to satisfy customers. He regularly earns overtime because the managers know that if they need an extra hand, he's the guy to call. Ezra is the type of employee that most companies dream of having on their team. Yet because he has an intellectual disability and trouble communicating, no one would give him a chance. And their loss is our gain. Due to Ezra's exceptional hard work, he's risen to the role of supervisor, as I mentioned, where we trust him to open the car wash in the morning, to manage a crew of up to 6 team members, and ensure that customers leave happy with a high quality service. Many of our employees, they're also unyieldingly honest. In some workplaces, it's really difficult to get honest feedback from the team members about how things are going, but that is not true at ours. And it makes it much easier for us to improve operations for everybody. For example, when we're guiding customers onto the conveyor, we often see customers get a little confused, and this would cause some really difficult interactions for our team members, stressful, and it also slows down our production speed. So to fix this problem, we designed this paddle that you can see in the picture, where one side it says drive forward, they flip it around, and the other side it says place your car in neutral. Now this drastically reduced the amount of stressful interactions that customers had and made with our team members, but it also made the customer experience better. But there was one rub on this tool. It was really difficult to hold on to our pressure cleaner, which we use to clean the front bumper of the vehicles before they go into the automated car wash. Our solution, it was to try to design a pressure cleaner where our team members could operate with one hand. And this was a little tricky because we've got 2 triggers on our pressure cleaner. One of them is operates the water, the other one operates the soap. But one of our location managers, Nick, was hell-bent on designing one that would work. He spent weeks on it, prototyping different options, and then he finally had one where he thought it would really work well. Within 30 minutes, though, of giving this prototype to our tunnel associate, Sandra, she proclaimed to me, "Tom, what the hell is this thing? It's terrible. How do you expect me to work with this?" So obviously, Nick's a little upset at this point. He's getting negative feedback from his employee to his boss. And I think in this situation, most managers would defend their solution and just force Sandra to use it. But not Nick. Nick asked questions, and then he explained why he built it. And it became really clear, really quickly, that Sandra and all of the tunnel associates, what they needed wasn't a one-handed gun. What they needed was a really good strap for their sign. So without hesitation, Nick and I, we sprung to action working alongside of Sandra. We found a strap that had a really nice cushion, a clasp that could swivel around so when they rotate the sign, it wouldn't get twisted up. And then we bought some rubber bolt caps so when the sign was hanging down, it wouldn't rub against team members' legs. And just like that, the problem was solved. In our quest to improve quality, we also started using 2 different towels to clean the windows. So we had these microfiber towels to clean the glass, and then we had a micro spun thin blue towel that would wipe away any of the streaks. And while this worked great to clean the glass, it was difficult for our employees to constantly switch between them. It would get kind of awkward. And then one day we saw our associate Will, and he started to neatly stack these 2 towels on top of each other. So he could just flip them back and forth. And we thought this was brilliant. So we actually took Will's lead and we started sewing them together the same way that he had stacked them. And this improved the quality of the window that we were cleaning, but also decreased process time and just simply made it easier for our team members to execute the process. So as you can see from those last two examples, we've received significant value from our team members because we embrace not just their incredible talents, but also their perceived differences. As Dr. Stephen Shore says here in this quote, people with autism, they tend to be a study of extremes. They tend to have their strengths tend to be exceptionally strong and their weaknesses tend to be challenging. But their weaknesses aren't different. They're just more apparent. And this makes our employees with autism the consummate extreme user. As all innovators know, designing for and with extreme users, it's an integral part of building the best solutions. So I'd like to propose a different way to frame the work that needs to be done to help our employees with autism thrive. Our community, the autism community, it tends to talk a lot about the accommodations that need to be made for people with autism. What if, though, we looked at those things, not at things that needed to be accommodated for, but as insights to improving our businesses for everyone who used them, as a ticket to moving our organizations from average to excellent. And I think that we underestimate the value in this approach to neurodiversity because most organizations, they don't fail because they're bad. They fail because they're average, and average just isn't good enough anymore. So let's talk about some of the most fundamental problems our employees with autism have helped us uncover and solve. So first, and this is probably the most obvious problem our employees with autism have helped us solve, is that hiring based on interviews. So you might be saying, well, that's just the way people are hired, and but think about how often you hear things like, I can't find good people, or I can't afford good people, or my employees, they burn out really quickly. We just accept this as part of doing business. And we just take it for granted that, this is the way we've always hired. It must be fine. But the truth is that traditional unstructured hiring, interviewing, is a completely broken system. So let's take a look at this alarming statistic for a second. Did you know that 81% of people are lying to you in interviews? That's right, 81% of people are either embellishing their skills or just completely making them up. And this number actually goes up when we look at more technical roles and we interview more extroverted people. But it gets worse. Research shows that our brains are wired to make quick decisions about people, to size them up within the first few seconds of meeting them. And then the rest of the time we're speaking to that person, our brains are essentially just filtering all that information that we receive to validate our initial perceptions of the person. And what information do our brains use to make these quick decisions? Things like height, tone of voice, physical attractiveness, handshake, eye contact. In fact, there's a term for this. It's called the halo effect, where we generalize one positive attribute of a person, and then we bring it to everything else about them. So if someone is tall and good looking, we expect them also to be smart and kind and so on and so forth. But how many of you think that these are actually effective measures of determining if somebody's actually good at a job we're hiring for? So it should come as no surprise that the results of unstructured interviewing are painfully poor. In an 85-year study of unstructured interviews, we found that there was only a 14% correlation between the interviewer's assessment of a candidate and that job's success. And across the board, from entry-level hiring to executive hiring, 50% of new hires fail within 6 to 18 months. So how do we do better? When we set out to recruit our first employees with autism, it was clear right away that traditional methods of assessing talent were useless to us. Resumes, most of our guys didn't have them. Many of them hadn't ever worked before. College education, nope. Interviews, forget it. As we just talked about, Interviews are primarily a test of social ability and therefore inadvertently are designed to weed people on the autism spectrum out. So after some early conversations with trailblazers like Aspiratech and Specialist Sterna, and the help of 2 corporate disability consultants, we designed a job audition where we actually went out and worked on a real car. This audition allowed us to see if a candidate actually was able to follow directions, had the physical ability to do the job, and if they were okay in the work environment. It also allowed our candidates to get a more accurate understanding of if they really wanted to work with us. This method provided us with a platform to build off of and refine. So as we ran into new challenges in the workplace, we could actually modify the audition accordingly. And over the years, we turned this assessment into an iPad-based tool that gave us an evaluation score. And with the data on hundreds of candidates, we're now able to say with near certainty how likely someone is to pass our training program and receive a job offer. And it's worked exceptionally well for us. In the 8 years we've been doing this, we've only had 3 hires with autism fail due to job performance, and we haven't had a single one in the last 3 years. But while we understood that this was the best way to hire candidates with autism from pretty much the get-go, early on, we assumed that the traditional hiring methods were just fine for our neurotypical employees. We made the same mistakes that most organizations make. We hired based on liking or thinking the candidate was qualified. We hired based on past job experience and things like job coaching, car washing, and restaurant fields. This all failed spectacularly. And I became obsessed with figuring out how to do this better for years until I did what was the most obvious thing I could do, which was look at the people who were actually successful in these roles and try to figure out why. And it turns out that the success of our neurotypical employees, it had nothing to do with prior work experience. Most of them didn't have any. It also turned out that they didn't wow us in the interview. They showed grit, they showed a growth mindset, humility, openness, and assertiveness. And once we started trying to build an interview process to identify these behaviors, a really funny thing happened. Not only did we get more accurate at identifying good hires, but we started to find talent in unlikely sources. Young people from disadvantaged backgrounds, people with ADHD, learning challenges, they'd all learned to persevere through challenging situations, which is grit. They all learned to view failure as part of learning. That's growth mindset. They recognized that it's okay not to have all the answers, humility. They were open to receiving feedback and new ideas, and they learned to stick up for themselves and others around them, which is assertiveness. So to test for these attributes, we developed what's called a structured interview process, where we interview a candidate based on a consistent set of open-ended questions where the interviewer gives a 1 to 5 rating on each attribute that we're looking for. And we always have at least 2, ideally 3 candidate or interviewers score the candidate independently. So this is called a structured interview. And according to Google's Oxygen project, when you combined word tests with structured interviews, it's by far the most accurate way to assess job fit. So the lesson here is that designing or hiring processes based on objective measures of skill and behavior, they not only drastically improve the accuracy of hiring decisions made, but it also vastly broadens the talent pool at which you can hire from. And while I gave examples from how these tools work in our business, virtually every leading autism employer is doing using similar tools, getting remarkably impressive results. Also, companies like Google and WordPress are utilizing them across their entire organizations. So to me, the most important thing that any business can do to make their organizations more inclusive and competitive is building hiring systems like this. So the next problem that our employees with autism helped us solve, one that I think a lot of us probably take for granted, that you would let go of your most challenging employees. So the symptoms of this problem are that workers are frustrated and they're ignoring protocols. customer experience is mediocre at best, and employees are slow or wasting time. So over the years, we've had many employees who have pushed us to do better, but none quite like Pat. Oh, how often I wanted to fire Pat. And the funny thing about Pat, who marched into the wash the day he turned 16 years old and demanded to be hired, was that he not only had a burning desire to be a good employee, but to rise into a management position. And there had already been employees with autism who defied our original assumptions that our managers would all be neurotypical, but they were all a bit older and already had extensive employment experience. Pat was plenty intelligent and exceptionally driven, but he was also incredibly immature. And his eagerness to move up in the organization, it sometimes led to conflict that when he would try to take control of the situation or do somebody else's job. And while he always had the best of intentions, going over other employees' heads led to frustration, a lot of confusion, and sometimes hostility from those employees. At this point, we had been in business for about a year, and we thought we had all of our operational systems pretty well buttoned up. But now Pat, who is the consummate extreme user, was showing us that we still had a lot of work to do. And since car washing is an on-demand production service, think a lot like a restaurant, inevitably there are going to be days when we're busy and we have too little staff, or some days where it's slow and we have too much staff, days where we staff 10 people, other days where we staff 25 people. And it can get really confusing really quickly, even without someone like Pat who's constantly trying to do everybody else's job. So to combat this variability, we built a visual and well-defined hierarchy of daily tasks, created training that outlined what each person, each role was supposed to do in a variety of different situations, when it was slow, when it was busy, when we were understaffed, when we were overstaffed. And then we assigned those roles based on a training board, which you can see here. So the people who had the most confirmed skills would have the highest roles for the day, and then we'd cascade down from there. So now our team members, they know what each person is responsible for across dozens of situations that occur every day. And they know who is in charge and who to go for help with a customer or for a new assignment. Another key part of becoming a manager for us is the ability to give great customer service and coach our team members effectively. And these are social skills that Pat, he struggled with, and you'd often become overloaded or panicked. To work through these, what we did was we developed a variety of if-then scenario-based trainings, as well as specific rules to guide decision-making with customer service, like the 3-minute rule, where a customer, if they had a request that was outside of the normal service process, but we could do it in less than 3 minutes, we would just do it. Or a clear framework around how to coach effectively, like we ask what and how questions, but we don't ask why questions. So on Pat's rise to supervisor, he also helped us improve a variety of systems, from the way that we organized our production floor, which you can see in this picture, everything's nicely color-coded, to the way that we built our checklists for every aspect of operations. But none of these instrumental improvements would have happened if we just labeled Pat as difficult and either we marginalized him or fired him. From working with employees like Pat, we developed an organizational habit of almost obsessively focusing on creating operational clarity. We've seen time and time again that when we don't provide clear expectations and guidance, our employees struggle. But on the other hand, when we do build clarity, our employees tend to rise beyond those expectations and they drastically improve. And it also improves the efficiency that we have for teaching new employees the skills that they need to be successful. This combination of pain that exists when there's no clarity and the success that comes with clarity when it's embedded into our organizational systems, it's really created such a strong desire for us to constantly strive to improve our workplace clarity. And this is in myself, but also in the rest of our leadership team. So once we recognized how valuable it was to design around our employees' needs, we developed a whole host of systems. So I previously mentioned how we improved the atomic guide-on process with the paddles that you can see here, as well as our window cleaning process. We also started using actually restaurant pagers to call back customers when the service was done. And we did this because we saw how awkward it could be when an associate would roam through the waiting area and say, you know, red Toyota, until a customer finally peered up from their iPhone and claimed the vehicle. So this not only improved our customer experience, but it also improved our processing speed because our team members now could stay on the production floor and move quickly to the next car. But to unlock this type of value, it takes managers who are dedicated to coming up with the best solution, not just their solution. And to do this, you need managers who think like designers. When I say that, I mean that they first look at a problem that they're trying to solve from the user's perspective, so from the employee's perspective. And then they start to build prototypes and get feedback from the rest of the team. And then they're open enough to use that feedback for the right solution, to create the right solution for the people who are actually using it. You think back to the story of Sandra and the strap. That was a moment of insight that was generated because we were really willing to listen to our team members. So here's another example. So we found that we had several team members who were consistently making errors in our nightly cash out procedure. And after observing how some of our team members were doing this procedure, it became clear that the root of the problem was lack of organization in the process. Once the money got mixed up, it was really difficult to find and correct a mistake. So two of our management team members, they designed something they called the money mat, which, think about it, it's like a monopoly board for sorting cash. And this concept, in theory, it made a lot of sense, but there was one problem. That when they introduced the money mat prototype to our team, one of our supervisors with autism, Luco, he hated it. And this was partially due to being stuck in his routine, but he also had some really valid points. He brought up good points around how the board was structured and how some of the proportionality was off. So our managers, they worked together with Luco to redesign it. And then they incorporated Luco's feedback and rolled out a final design, which you can see here. This is the final product. And after a few weeks of putting that product into the field, we reran the numbers, and our error rate dropped from 31% to 4%. It reduced the amount of training time as well for teaching new team members the closing procedure. But not only were the results drastic, right after we implemented that final money mat design at the location Luca was working at, he transferred to our other location because it was closer to his home. And within a week of being there, he actually started to advocate to his peers and his managers that they really needed to get that money mat because it made the process so much easier. The lesson here that is when we embrace our extreme users, we lean into perspective taking and curiosity, we design better systems for customer experience as well as employee experiences. This sounds like a good thing, right? Why wouldn't you want everybody to always agree with you? And I thought so too at first, but I turned out I was really wrong. When I started my leadership journey, I held many of the stereotypical leadership beliefs that I'm a leader, I'm dominant, my team is here to do as I ask them to do and to help me achieve my ends, and that it's my way or the highway. And now, this wasn't on purpose, but simply because this is what I had been told leadership is, from the movies, from my college classes, from adults that I admired. Even as my stated mission in life was to help empower individuals with autism, not being fully aware of this story, it led me to creating a whole host of issues. I would get really angry when people didn't do what I deemed was a good job. I would blame instead of try to understand. I would write people off, and I would direct and be authoritative even when I had no idea what I was doing. And I believe all of these behaviors, they stemmed from what I unconsciously believed leadership was. And as an avid reader of enlightened leadership books like Conscious Business, Tribal Leadership, Leaders Eat Last, and everything Brene Brown has ever written, you would have thought that I could simply change my behavior and act accordingly to what I consciously understood great leadership was. Yet that knowledge, it didn't translate to behavior change. And this led me to create situations on our team where the team wasn't working well together. My team was not letting me know when there were problems. And I was even unintentionally outcasting people who held different perspectives than I did. And it turns out that this style of leadership that I was displaying was far from effective. And in fact, there's very little evidence that proves an authoritarian leadership style is effective in any situation. What is effective? Leaders who create psychologically safe environments. So that means that they create enough trust within their teams to allow their team members to feel safe enough to take risks and speak their mind because they're not afraid of failing or consequence of failing. And actually, so Google started their Autism project with the quest to understand what made their best teams the best, thinking that it'd probably be some mix of technical ability, like, add one part programmer, one part PhD, one part designer, and voila, you've got a great team. But it turned out that that was completely wrong. It turned out that psychological safety was the single most important factor. It also turned out that the team leader had a disproportionate impact on psychological safety. And this was not good news for my team as authoritarian Tom was guiding them. But luckily, my approach was failing so much that it was impacting my ability to meet our stated objective of running a successful business that employed people with autism for 80% of our staff. My authoritarian, fixed mindset style of leadership, coupled with a lack of skill and confidence to communicate directly, it just simply wasn't working. But when I started to lead by asking questions, being direct, admitting when I didn't have the answer, I started to finally see the team improve. They felt more safe. They understood what I wanted from them. And they were willing to collaborate with me on solutions instead of just pointing the finger. Yet, I doubt any of this would have happened unless I was committed to my mission. I likely would have just kept pushing people harder and tried to find better people because it obviously, it had to be them. It could not have been me. And I say this with confidence because it's taken me years and I still fail all of the time to apply this same style of leadership to my typical staff members. It was so much easier to start these behaviors with my employees with autism because I knew I was there to support them and I felt comfortable and committed to acting in service to them. And over time, I've gotten better and better with the rest of the staff too, because I've seen over and over again that this style of leadership is so much more effective. The ball was now rolling, but I doubt it ever would have started moving without my team members with autism. So I call this permission to care. By deliberately inviting people into your organization who are traditionally left out and committing to helping them reach their potential, you send a powerful message to the entire company that it's okay to be who you are, that we see you as a unique individual with unique strengths and weaknesses, that we're all interdependent, and that you need to be honest with each other, and when things aren't working well, you need to be open to admitting that and improving. And when an organization commits itself to employing people with autism and its leaders dedicate themselves to the growth of their employees with autism and design systems for them, there's a range of beneficial organizational behaviors that cascade. These behaviors include unbiasing the hiring process, obsessive clarity throughout the organization, coaching and feedback, learning from failure, curiosity and compassion. And then those behaviors, they lead to key outcomes, which are psychological safety and belonging, accountability among the team, connection with your customers, operational efficiency, and organizational purpose. And here's how it works at Rising Tide. We have a net promoter score, which is the customer's willingness to recommend us to their friends and family, of 87 compared to an industry average of 63. Our customer acquisition cost is roughly a third of our competition. We have a 5 times lower turnover rate than our competition, 20% better loading efficiency. We've never, knock on wood, we've never had a work-related injury with our team members with autism. And our employees are in the 97th percentile for employee pride. And now that's measured compared to all organizations that are using a pulse software called Office Vibe. Our car wash employees, they have more pride in their work than doctors, lawyers, engineers, and the like. And the business is very financially healthy. But I want to be clear, we're not unique. A car wash is an inherently meaningless and challenging environment. If we can do these things in a car wash, operating with the same cost structures as our competitors, they can likely be done at any small or medium-sized business. The great news here is that none of this really costs any more. There's no real cost associated with what we're talking about. By simply upgrading the way that you hire and reframing the way that your organizational leaders lead, you create a business that leverages the power of diversity. And just think for a moment the impact that would have on society if more people adopted this type of strategy. Over the life of each of our car washes, we'll employ hundreds of people with autism, most of which they'll move on to other jobs in the community. And everyone who comes through our doors will leave understanding that everyone is valuable. And for our family, this business has changed our lives. It's brought us closer together. It's provided Andrew with a career. And more importantly, though, it's provided him with a sense of purpose. He takes pride in his work. He has friends that he gets to see regularly. And he knows that he can work through difficult situations, learn, and get better. If more organizations take up this type of strategy, not only will we make the world a more fair place, but we'll be helping organizations acquire better talent, create better experiences, and build a stronger culture. Because everyone wins when anyone can win. Thank you. So now I didn't see any questions come through, but I'm now happy to answer any questions y'all might have.
Tom, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
I got a couple for you here. A couple came through. You mentioned actually a couple books that you spent some time in an author. Would you mind repeating that again?
Yeah. So I mentioned some great leadership books that I've read. So Brene Brown, she's one of them. She's written a bunch of really wonderful books on leading with the type of courage that creates psychological safety. Conscious Business by Fred Kaufman is another really excellent one. Leaders Eat Last by Simon Sinek is another really excellent book. Yeah. But honestly, what's compelling is that, like, when you look at like all of these like best-selling authors and all the things they're advocating for, a lot of this stuff occurs naturally in organizations that take up this type of mission.
You know, I gotta say here, listening to your presentation, obviously the initial intent was around autism and the subject of autism and employment of autism. But what I am so thankful of is that the primary content of it, really the autism was secondary. It is about human relations. Yeah. And really, what does it mean being a good listener to the people that you're committed to? Yeah. I commend you, being a small business owner, it's so easy to fall into the trope of a leadership is about an authoritative kind of approach. Yeah. And historically, I'm sure like yourself, you know, all the businesses I've ever worked for previous to AAI, that's what I observed. Management sitting behind a desk, pointing a finger, and it was pretty much a fear factor. Yep. Thing. You do what I say. If you don't, then you're going to be kind of punished. Yep. Opening that door up of this inclusivity and this collective effort to accomplish a goal, I've always felt is a lot hard. You know, it's easier said than done. It takes a lot of diligence. Yep. And you used a lot of words inside your presentation about you know, kind of like, for lack of better words, like, you know, your ego, where is that inside of this? How do you let that go? What does it mean to be right versus what does it mean to be wrong? And really, how important is that when you're trying to accomplish a goal? So I just want to really commend you that this presentation, yes, had some subject about autism, but it was really about, hey, we're talking about human beings here and what it means to be a member of society with tasks. So that really very, very impressive. Something else that I just am kind of observing from listening to you is not only are these things that you're implementing, they take effort, a lot of work. This, you know, to develop this team around you for your community does require, like, you know, or like I said earlier, a lot of work. However, boy, it sounds like there's some fun going on too.
For sure.
You know, like, it's rewarding. And you said something when you gave some of your analytics on, yeah, you know, we're doing okay financially as a business. Well, that's, I mean, that's an objective to sustain and to be able to support your team. But man, everyone's participating in those outcomes and takes ownership of those things. So I just, so very, very impressive. Really nice job.
Thank you.
How would you say that, specifically now, if you don't mind a little bit, with the idea of the ASD, the autism, how did the community at large kind of respond to when you first initiated some of these projects? When you had community members coming on in, was it advertised that, hey, we are this is what you're going to be contending with, this is, you know, the type, you know, this is the population of people that we are thankful to be working with, or was it not advertised that way?
So this is it's a great question, because at first we were really nervous about saying anything about autism. We weren't sure how the community would respond. So we didn't say anything for the first 6 months of operations. So because what we were afraid of was that at this point, we didn't really know what we were doing from operating a car wash. And we didn't want people to think that we stunk because of our employees with autism. We wanted them, you know, we stunk because we didn't know what we were doing. And once we felt we got a little bit more confidence in the product that we were putting out, we started to let the word out. And the community has embraced it almost ubiquitously. I mean, people talk about the car wash as part of, like, it's an integral, when, you know, we've been in our Parkland community now for 8 years. When people talk about Parkland and their pride they have for their community, we're always in that conversation, that we're there. And they, you know, our business, when we first started talking about it, initially, you know, so we were on the nightly news in April of 2013 or April of 2014, just about a year after we opened. The business quadrupled in the course of the next 8 months. And that was solely due because now the community really knew, like, hey, like, these guys are doing something awesome, let's go support them. And then they got a great quality service. They wouldn't have kept coming back if the quality of the service wasn't there or the prices were, like, outrageous. It's all got to be competitive. But then when you have a mission like this, you connect with your community, you connect with your customers, and that is what separates us. We don't have to do heavy discounts in order to get people in the door, or take up big billboard advertisements to get people in the door. They come because their neighbors say, hey, you know, if you need a car wash, you should go over there. They're doing awesome stuff.
Yeah, see, therein lies it again. I really do appreciate it. So often when it comes to autism, it becomes such a primary subject. And it really, I mean, I understand it. But last week when we were meeting with Temple Grandin and she was talking about herself, yes, autism itself has significant impact in who she is. And she's very thankful of that, of course, like we all are. We are who we are. But she said, you know, it's not primarily who I am by any means. You know, I'm a teacher, right? I'm a member of society, and I really, that's just absolutely, you know, wonderful.
Yeah.
How has it been for you when you do interview and you do have individuals who are, for lack of better words, neurotypical coming in? Are you telling them ahead of time, hey, this is, what your, this is the population of people that we employ, or is it really that you're such a known entity that kind of everyone knows what to expect at this point?
It's another good question, because so we don't tell them, we ask them, so what do you know about us? And it's very telling when somebody doesn't know that we employ people with autism. It's not a game breaker either way, but it tells you that the person hasn't really done their homework about the business they're applying to work at. And then when we start to talk about the mission, generally our typical employees, that's why they're applying, or most of the really strong ones. And the ones that apply that aren't mission aligned, it's not necessarily a deal breaker, because a lot of times they're just like really passionate about cars, or they're like a young kid from a disadvantaged community that sees like their friends work for us, and they haven't talked about that. But then once they get hired, so we don't give autism specific training until usually a couple months into the employment experience, because what we want them to do is we want them to understand, so since we're 80% people with autism, our typical employees are the minority. So in order for them to be accepted by their peers, they have to accept people with autism. It's impossible to you get rejected from the community if you didn't. So we want them to also treat their team members with autism like anybody else. Then once they get into a little bit more responsibility, we give a series of autism related trainings to kind of fill in some of the blanks of things that they may have observed, but they may not understand right away.
And what when you mention, if you don't mind me asking, you don't feel as though you have to answer some of these questions, but when you mentioned kind of autism training after a couple months, what does something like that look like for you guys? Yeah.
So it's 3-part training series. First part is just like a basic introduction to autism. Like these are like, maybe you observe some of these things in our team members, like some repetitive behavior, some like they get really stressed out if their schedule gets messed with, or difficulty interacting in social situation, really intense focus on detail. So it's just kind of like, hey, this is what autism is, right? These are the things that you're observing. The second training is a lot of our management philosophy, which is we expect our team members with autism to carry their weight just like we expect any other team member to do. We believe that how you manage team members with autism is not any different than how you should manage anyone. So by doing these things, like, leading with vulnerability, leading by asking questions, focusing on getting, intellectual humility, getting to truth, not just getting to your answer. By doing those things, you lead everybody better. And that's what actually people with autism need too. And then the third part of the training is the scenario-based training. So like some common workplace situations and like how to handle them.
It's really very impressive. I mean, again, I can't help but just kind of step back in that, I'm so thankful to hear that, that autism is really a very second nature thing. You're really looking at all those things that you're saying are about being human, wise, human sensitive, being open-hearted and mindful about, a much more grand agenda going on. Yeah, we're here doing the car wash. We got this going on, but it's really a community within a community. And that's pretty nice stuff. What do you feel, is there anything that you've observed over time with individuals coming in who are on the spectrum of, you're kind of like, darn, I wish these, some of these individuals were provided these certain skill sets ahead of time coming on in? Because the reason why I ask this, no disrespect to communities or educational institutions, but there's agencies out there, but there's often kind of this, tiptoeing kind of thing, right? Like, it's for all of us, the bar needs to be high. Right? The readiness for life requires exposure. And unfortunately, You can get a lot of individuals who are on the spectrum, and their life becomes kind of harbored in out of, friends, family, professionals, fear of exposure. So is there anything that you've observed, like, darn, I wish that something was being provided ahead of time? Or it's a bit of a large question.
No, it's a great question. I think in general, the support that our employees with autism receive through the school system is usually pretty strong.
Good.
What tends to lack sometimes is the support, the holding, like you said, holding the bar high on certain expectations. So like giving them, like a lot of times the job coaches will give a travel training, like how to get to work, how to use the buses to get to work. But there's not such a focus on, hey, you need to be at work, 15, 20 minutes early, getting the bus that's going to get you there at 1:05 when your shift starts at 1:00 is not acceptable.
Right.
And that, having to kind of rework some of those expectations tends to be some of the larger friction that we receive with new employees, because a lot of times they haven't been held to that type of standard. Parents often have to take a very much of a protector role when their kid is a child, right? They've advocated for them in the school district to get the services that they need. They've advocated to them in the community that, they deserve to be treated fairly. And that is really important when a young person is a child. But as they become an adult, the role, has to shift to being a coach, where you're no longer there to fight your child's battles. You're there to help them fight their own. And so when we hold people to those high expectations early on, there's a bit of a growing period. And sometimes without the right support at home or the right support at school, the person doesn't want to do it, and they quit when they could have gotten through it.
Tom, what do you think that we can do better as a society of employers? I mean, obviously, I don't mean to speak for all the participants here, but I mean, it is a very beautiful approach. There's a very small number of people in society that, business owners in particular, that approach things like this. But what do we have to do better as a collective culture to? It's
a great question. It's a very broad question, but it's a great question.
Sure it is.
I think so. And as I'm sure you get this through the training or through the presentation I gave, my philosophy on a lot of this is that it's not a lot of stuff that we need to do specifically for people with autism, but more that we just need to do better for everybody. And so for children and for school, there's a growing movement of teaching character skills. I think that, like if you're teaching those things to children, all children, specifically children with autism, you better equip them to be well-functioning adults. And for organizations, all the things that I talked about, like they're not autism related. They're not unique to autism organizations, but they're actually all you need to do in order to successfully support people with autism. Because like you said, they're just people. They just have, sometimes their needs are a little bit more apparent than typical population, but those needs aren't any different.
That's right. So where would you say that rising tide, where do you improve?
Oh, I mean, so I'm the type of person, I'm never going to be satisfied with what's going on.
I wouldn't think so.
Yeah, I'm just not. I can't.
And you shouldn't be.
This is one of my bigger flaws is that like I'm always pushing to do better, and I have trouble like celebrating the good things that have happened. It drives some of my team members nuts. But the things to me that we need to do a better job of is, so we do a really good job investing in training for the portion of our team who we feel can rise into supervisor and management roles. But because we're a small organization that we have limits on the resources we have for training, there are some team members that they deserve training. They've been with us for a long time. They can do it. It just takes it's more time intensive. And because of that, they don't always get it. That to me is the biggest flaw in our system right now, that we need to make the training process more efficient so it can be distributed more effectively across the team.
You know, it's again, and you are going to keep getting pats on the back for all of this, but there's this fear of one trying to dig in and find, for lack of better words, your weak areas or the weakness in oneself or one's organization. And it's actually a very strong value, at least from my perspective. And it says a lot about who you are as an individual and the environment that you've created. So I really commend you on that. It's really quite a beautiful thing.
Appreciate that.
Tom, you've been absolutely transparent, really very giving through this. I appreciate it. It's a fantastic close to a wonderful series. Everything here has been recorded. We'll put it up. There may be some follow-up questions down the road, if you don't mind. Of course. If you're okay with it, just ever reaching out just to try to. Thank you. I really do appreciate that. I wish you the very best. You're a great advocate for humanity. You deserve big pats on the back, and clearly so does your entire team that have been around with you for a long time. So congratulations. Thank you. And on behalf of everyone sitting here watching, thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, and hopefully we get to cross paths again here in the near future. So
yeah, you too, man. This was great. It's an honor to be able to present to you guys, and yeah, for sure, go ahead and reach out. I'm happy to answer questions.